Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Just Drew podcast, except today is more like the Almost Just Drew podcast. We have a special co-host today and my friend Trevor. Unfortunately, Drew wasn't able to make this episode, and instead of rescheduling on Aaron, Trevor was gracious enough to step in and give it a shot. So thank you, Trevor. That leads us to today's guest, Aaron Ettinger. Aaron specializes in international relations and U.S. foreign affairs. His research focuses on U.S. foreign policy in the post-Cold War era and its implications for world order. Now, don't mind me, I'm just going to read off my notes here so I don't get anything wrong. His current SSHRC IDG funded project explores Canada-U.S. relations during the Trump presidency. Recent published work covers a range of issues including U.S. and Canadian foreign policy, sports and politics, and international relations pedagogy. His research appears in International Studies Review, International Studies Perspectives, Survival Security Dialogue, Millennium, International Journal, Canadian Foreign Policy, Journal Politics, Comparative Strategy, Cambridge Review of International Affairs, and International Journal of Sports Policy and Politics. In the classroom, his program embraces the global IR agenda and its push for greater disciplinary inclusiveness and intellectual diversity. He teaches classes on a wide range of topics, including a first-year course on world order in an age of crisis. Before joining the Faculty of Political Science at Carleton, he taught at the University of Waterloo, Dalhousie University, and Queen's University. I had initially met Aaron at a private lecture on sports washing, specifically sports washing with Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince, also known as MBS, and his 10-year plan. This is what I consider to be my first academic podcast. I have no education in world history or politics, although I do have a love for both. I did make sure to brush up on a few of Aaron's papers before this episode, so I hope I do this one justice. Aaron was kind enough to take the time out of his day to travel and share his knowledge on this podcast. So Aaron, I just wanted to thank you directly, and we hope to have you on again soon. Now for today's cocktail.
Introducing the Spin Doctor. Well, some may recognize this as a boulevardier, but we need to stay on theme for this episode. Place a large ice cube into a cocktail glass. Add 1 ounce whiskey, 1 ounce sweet vermouth, and 1 ounce Campari, plus a few dashes of Angostura bitters. Stir well. Lastly, expel the oils from an orange twist, rim the glass, and garnish. A sophisticated but flavorful drink. The Spin Doctor embodies the idea of manipulation and reshaping narratives, mirroring the concept of sports washing, where the true essence of sports is often obscured by corporate interests and agendas. Now here is Aaron Ettinger.
Hey you, you're listening to Just Drew, Just Drew, Just Drew.
So you've done, obviously especially COVID, I feel like that would be very different than teaching in a lecture hall.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yes.
I mean, it's a different genre, it's a different, venue, different type of audience. In the lecture hall, it's an event, it's a theater. Everybody is here and they're more or less captive audiences.
Yeah.
More or less, but you're there and you can go big, and I'm a big guy and I have a big voice, so I can fill a room of 250 or 300 students.
Yes.
And it's, gripping, and you can use your voice to go up and then down and draw them in.
Yeah.
It's very theatrical. But in this kind of setting, even if there are 200 students in a classroom, you're still talking to them one-on-one.
And they can change the volume.
So you can't shout at them through the speakers is the way I used to. So you got to modulate, and you got to figure it out.
Yeah.
And we all did. Well, some of us did during those years.
It must have been, so how long were you teaching before COVID hit?
Depending on how you count, it's from about 2009. So I started I was a teaching assistant when I was a master's student in 06, 07. I went back to do a PhD in 2009, where I was also a teaching assistant. So you're in the classroom, you're teaching, but you don't have your own course to run. You are serving another professor's interests. It was 2014 that I got control of my own class for the very first time, and it was fantastic. And I adapted quickly to this new kind of set of responsibilities and what it takes to run a 3-hour class instead of a 1-hour class.
Yeah.
To how to build a syllabus. You build it like it's like it's a TV show, like it's a TV series. Like everything needs to flow logically from the other, and builds towards something. What that is, you figure it out depending on the subject matter.
So it's engaging.
It's very engaging.
Yeah.
So since 2014, I've been teaching as many as 3 classes per term.
Okay.
Which is a lot. 3 is a lot. 1 is, well, perhaps too small, but 2 is that nice sweet spot in the middle.
Yeah, so you're not too overwhelmed.
Not too overwhelmed.
Yeah.
In the early going of my teaching career and of everybody's teaching career, you are swamped because you don't know what the hell you're doing.
Yeah.
You don't know how much work you have to put in to fill 90 minutes of lecture time.
Yeah.
You don't know how much it takes to do what it takes, and there's no, this is all in real time. There's no beta testing.
Yeah. And so obviously you're the expert in your given subject that you're teaching, but is there any kind of, does the university have a say in how you structure your lectures, or is that all up to you?
Entirely up to you.
Oh, nice. So your heart and soul and personality is just in that lecture.
Oh yeah. We're very, very lucky in the sense that the only instruction that we get is, here's the class you're teaching. Here's when it is going to run. See you in a year.
Wow.
Right, everything else is up to you.
Okay. All right. I didn't know how it worked. I went to university for a year, so I got a taste of it, and I did some lectures. But I was always curious how much I don't know what the right word is, independence you get.
Yeah, independence is, well, that's the reason that I wanted to get into this business, into the academic world, and certainly the reason that I stay, because effectively have no boss. Nobody tells me what to do. Nobody tells me when to do it.
Do you have to get like your syllabus approved at all, or is it just
nominally you have to send it to the department chair, who just rubber stamps it and says go? Because we all recognize that we are the experts in our area.
Yeah.
We are the ones who are have to execute this, and we all respect each other's choices. Well, I mean, more or less we respect each other's choices. But we're not going to stand in each other's way, because we wouldn't want somebody to do that to us.
Yeah. Are you communicating often with other political science professors from other universities? Is there like a forum?
Yes.
Yeah.
Many, there are lots of, the networks, the Twitter clusters, this cluster, that cluster. I mean, in a formal sense, I am part of a series of networks here and there that try to bring together disparate people from across around the world. Who work in the same kind of issue area. That's a very common theme. And then at conference time, the big annual conference, everybody gets together, pretends to do work, but they're really going to the bar afterwards.
Oh,
right?
yes.
Where was I? I was in San Francisco a couple of weeks ago at that big annual conference where we all pretend that we're working and networking, but really and truly we're exploring a new cool city and restaurants and bars and all that kind of stuff.
I would say like most. Yeah.
Yeah, and informally, I have friends who I came up with through graduate school and sometimes undergraduate, and we're all still in touch, and we communicate and we share ideas, and you don't have to be in the same area of expertise to.
I was wondering,
ideas.
Is that all political science professors that you're meeting up with, or is it a mix of different subjects?
We'll call it a mix.
Okay.
I think they're all generally in the world of politics.
Geopolitics and...
all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But you can study something as wildly different as, like what I do, like American foreign policy, or what my partner does. She studies like land governance in East Africa.
Okay.
Right? From a gendered perspective. Which is fantastic.
Specific, yeah.
Well, it is. I mean, it is. But that's the kind of world we're in. Like, we're all studying power. Like, to me, the word politics and power are interchangeable, right? So we are studying how power operates in the same way that physicists explore how energy operates.
Yeah, and I read. So I wish I had time to read all your papers, but I did read the one on Trump pulling out of the Paris Accord agreement that you wrote.
Yes.
And there's so many, power, but also personalities coming into play and dictating how this power shifts and moves around the globe, and how all these different personalities interact with one another.
Oh, absolutely. Donald Trump has been so good for my career. It's a little embarrassing to have to admit that, but it's true, because he is the gift that keeps on giving. And, he even 4 years after he lost, he's still giving because, he's so consequential in certainly the American political context and globally and for Canadians. And you can't predict what comes next. And
I think you used the word, was it Trumpism?
Trumpism.
So it's almost like this, it carries on past his term.
Yeah, like the ism part is the ideas that are a bundle of that are wrapped up in the bundle of what he is. So he's a unique character, and we all know that. But he does have ideas, right? And these ideas may be articulated in a really ham-fisted way and really unsophisticated, but they're still ideas.
Yeah.
And if you read a little bit further out, these ideas do share similarities with like actual intellectual constructs that have been articulated for the past century in American political life. So you can find the antecedents to what Trump's ideas are in literature about the far right or the nationalist or isolationist right wing in the United States, and that's what makes it more than just the rantings of a crazy person.
Yeah.
Right. That's what makes it intellectually interesting.
Do you think he plays dumb a little bit? Is he smarter than when he leads off to? Because obviously his grammar and the way he speaks doesn't come off as someone like Obama, who's very
professorial.
Yes, because I feel like maybe he does kind of know how things work and just doesn't come off like that.
I don't think it's an act. I think he knows what he's doing and he's being himself.
Yeah,
like, you can tell when he's being a phony.
Yeah.
And that's when he's, you can tell that he's reading the teleprompter and, he'll say something and then he'll say, so true, so true. That's usually the moment when he's read something for the first time. Yeah. And that somebody else wrote on the teleprompter and he agrees with it.
Yeah.
You can tell he's being a phony baloney. It's when he is at his wild, unpredictable best that is who he is.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a put on. I mean, he's savvy and smart in that kind of New York business sense, cutthroat business sense. But as as a practitioner of logic and empirical science,
yes. And I don't want to butcher the term. I can't remember, but it was something about like a normative entrepreneur.
Norm entrepreneur.
That's the one.
Yeah, the norm entrepreneur is an idea that's been in political science for like 30 or 40 years now.
Okay.
And it's fairly intuitive, right? It's somebody who has an idea about how things should be, and like a business entrepreneur goes out into the world and tries to promote that idea, right? It's fairly self-explanatory. Now, political scientists will put it in the sequence of things that happen, like how does an idea emerge and then catch fire and then become a thing and then become institutionalized?
Yeah, yeah.
So the classic example is how did anti-racism emerge to become anti-apartheid, to become, a movement against the apartheid regime in South Africa, and eventually take over, how the world should approach South Africa in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Donald Trump, he's promoting his own ideas about how things ought to work. And it has emerged, it has spread to some degree. It has not yet been institutionalized because that's where like political contestation comes into play. But it's still there, and it's still potent enough to be a real political force, whether you like it or not. So as a political scientist, I stand back and look at this and say, even though I think these ideas are bad and I think he's nuts, there's a logic at play here. Like, how is power operating through these ideas, through the people that he's working with, through the political constituencies he's appealing to, through the rules and regulations that he's writing wrote as president? How is this operating to, affect a major issue area like climate change governance?
Yeah, because he pulled out of the Paris Accord of Climate.
He did. Yeah. And he was able to do that because it's not a treaty. It wasn't passed by Congress. It's not a law. It was Barack Obama signed this accord, right? It's an agreement. It's not binding legislation. So if a president can sign you in, next president can sign you out.
And I was reading in your paper, I think what he didn't like was, for example, China, they could emit, X amount of CO2, almost infinite, until 2030. But then America, in the other instance, was already being regulated. Yeah. Yeah, which he did not like.
He did not like. And that's, a lot of people don't like it because it's not like a flat fee. It's not a flat, fee for service kind of situation.
Yeah, and it affects economy. Obviously.
Of course. But the logic is that, it would be unfair to ask developing countries to, to restrict their industrialization now, when Britain, France, Germany, the United States got to get rich in the late 1800s, early
so far ahead.
1900s, without having to follow the rules.
Yeah.
So the principle of fairness is such that the developing countries now get to pollute in order to get rich enough to the point where it's okay to start scaling back, while everybody who had a 150-year head start needs to start slamming on the brakes right now.
Are westernized countries helping these developing nations financially or with technology or expertise or things like that?
They're doing their very best to not do that.
Because it costs money.
Because it costs money. The Western countries certainly don't want to transfer intellectual property rights, copyrights, technologies to the developing world without charging a fee. Right? They're more than happy to send
a credit.
Yeah, they're more than happy to send people and experts to go and consult and do all those kinds of nice things.
Yeah.
But they're not giving away their capital for free, right? And that's kind of the crux of the difficulty between the West and the developing world, because somebody has to pay a cost. And like in any walk of life, there's going to be haggling over the bill.
Yes. Yeah, who's going to pay that bill?
Well,
who's going to pay more of the bill? Are you paying more than me? How is that fair?
And the fairness question is what Trump reacts against, right?
Yes.
We will say that, okay, fairness depends on, let me start again. The Paris Climate Agreement turns on the idea of historical responsibility, right? That having a 150-year head start on industrialization it's not fair to kick away the ladder of development for the developing countries coming up right now. It would not be fair. So responsibility exists on a sliding scale. Trump doesn't like that. He says, if you give 50, I give 50.
America,
right?
America first.
It's America first. And as a
Yeah.
businessman, he's going to say, I don't want to be paying any more than I have to. It's not fair that guy pays 50% and I have to pay more or less or something along those lines. Right? So that strict equivalency is how Trump defines fairness, whereas fairness is defined by the kind of the global climate governance regime as being differential based on historical responsibility. Mm-hmm. That is the fundamental difference right there, this different notion of what is fair.
The way I picture it in my head is Trump with like a huge pillow sack full of Halloween candy, and Africa maybe has like a chocolate bar, and then Africa gets a chocolate bar, and he's like, well, I want a chocolate bar too, even though he has a pillowcase full of candy.
Yeah, strict equivalency.
Because that's not fair.
He's a businessman, right?
Yeah.
It's all about horse trading. It's all about, the bargain. And, in the cutthroat world of New York real estate, nobody's doing anybody else any favors based on principled notions of fairness. So you take the man out of the New York real estate world and plop him into an environment where the norms and the rules and the historical expectations are completely different.
Yeah.
We have a real clash. And he was not subtle about, making that argument.
Yeah. He's there to, I don't know if he does it on purpose, but just disrupt the order of things.
A little bit on purpose, a little bit that's his style, a little bit he genuinely believes that America should be first and America should not be paying an outsized role.
Yeah. Since Biden's been in, is America back in the Paris Accord agreements? How is that working? I haven't been up to date with it.
Yes.
Okay.
We're gonna have to check this here, but Joe Biden Joe Biden ran partly on the idea that if he's elected, he's going to bring the United States back into the Paris Climate Agreement, and he can do so just by executive order.
So he ran on that a bit.
He promised that, and I would be shocked if he had not done that.
Yes, but politicians are known to do that.
Yeah. So there. Okay. Despite rejoining the Paris Agreement, ... That's all I really need to know. I mean, what to me this suggests is just how vulnerable America's participation is in these voluntary global arrangements.
Yeah.
Right? That if it was signed into law, or if the United States entered into the Paris Agreement on the strength of executive order, an executive order can pull you out. So we might enter a situation whereby, if Trump wins in November, he'll just, retract Biden's executive order, and then the United States is out again, and we got this whiplash situation going back and forth, back and forth. It only becomes more stable once America's diplomatic agreements are institutionalized in law, once they're passed by Congress, right? The president of the United States can't just retract an act of Congress.
I think you touched on that a bit in your paper. It was about how other government bodies and institutions were still upholding the agreements by Paris, even though Trump pulled out of it.
Yeah.
They were still trying to meet those goals.
Yeah, even though they didn't have to legally.
Yeah.
They're still committed to the norms of chipping in on the whole climate change situation.
Yeah.
And so they followed the rules even though they didn't have to follow the rules.
Yeah. They just believer of the idea of it, which I think most of us, I would say most are, except for some, I don't know, particular groups, Trumpism.
Well, I mean, we all say that we want to chip in, but when it comes down to it, it's very difficult.
Yes.
That's why we have to have rules and laws to prevent us from, cheating a little bit on our, on our good environmental stewardship.
Yes, and it could definitely be more extreme. Like I know the whole straw thing with the turtle, the straw and the turtles thing, and now there's no straws, and I'm like, how much is that actually doing? But then they're serving you an entire plastic cup, but paper straw.
Yes. And
I'm like, I don't think this is balancing out.
No, I mean, there's some really potent examples of a bad environmental practice that people latch onto. The straw in the turtle's nose, the fish getting caught in the six pack plastic ring. Right? These are just small examples of a much larger problem, but because we can visualize it, plastic straws equal problem.
Bad.
Let's get rid of the plastic straws.
Me like turtle, straw bad.
Yes. Yeah. Turtle greater than plastic straw, which is, okay, I can give up my plastic straw. The paper ones you get at the Tim Hortons or the McDonald's, they're not so bad for the first 15 minutes or so. You just got to get your drink over in time. But, those are just small little flashpoints. The bigger issues are about, the systemic polluting that takes place, the cranking up of oil production. Whether or not you agree with pulling more Canadian oil out of Alberta, its presence on the world stage is going to contribute to more pollution, and that is a bad thing. Right? Now, there's no easy answers here, and I don't want to pretend like there are, but these are the kind of political trade-offs that have to be taken seriously.
Yeah.
Fighting over plastic straws is just a small little fun thing that you can key in on.
To me, it's like I don't know if that was a law, but it's just brands and big corporations kind of leaning into the narrative a bit.
Yeah, of course. It's greenwashing. I mean, we're here partly to talk about sports washing in Saudi Arabia and all that kind of stuff.
I've never heard that term, but now I know what that.
Greenwashing is an instance whereby a company does something that seems environmentally friendly in order to kind of launder its own reputation for not being environmentally friendly.
Monetary gain, not because they want to.
Yeah, it's partly monetary gain, but it's also reputational, which might the branding in the long term turn into monetary gain.
Yeah.
Maybe. We don't know.
Yeah, it probably does. Sadly to say.
There's some examples probably in which making the switch to something more environmentally sustainable is more cost effective.
Yeah.
Right? We can see that. Like it makes sense in some instances. What gets most of the attention, I would say, is the advertising. Right? You see it on TV when, I remember about 15 or 20 years ago, British Petroleum rebranded itself Beyond Petroleum. Right. And, something stunk right away.
Okay.
Big oil and, petrochemical companies claiming to be going green is, that just doesn't make sense.
They make foundations and they donate money to green initiatives, but they're still burning fossil fuels
precisely
on an extreme rate.
But reputation wise, they can say that they're doing good things, and it's very difficult to argue against the good things that they're doing, except by pointing out the fact that they're also doing bad things.
Yes.
All right, so both things can be true at the same time, and that leads us into this muddle of who is doing what and who's responsible for what.
So how strict has, as far as Canada's standpoint on the Paris agreements, like what are we supposed to be doing compared to America? We have a lot less people.
Yeah.
I also understand it's like the second or third largest oil reserve, I believe, if I'm right. what are we as a nation like? How strict is it for us?
We have the exact same responsibilities as the United States.
Okay.
Which is to say, the requirements from the Paris Climate Agreement are minimal at best. The only thing that is required is to report on, your gains or what you've done.
So you don't need to follow anything, but you do need to let this agreement know.
You don't have to do anything. We all agreed, in 2015 that everybody would try to reduce emissions to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by 2023. That's a mouthful, right? So basically, we're not going to let temperatures get above 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to what it was before the Industrial Revolution. So we're all going to try to do that, and that's going to involve cutting back here and there and doing this here and there. But it's proven to be extremely difficult because it's going to cost money, it's going to cost jobs, it's going to cost a lot of people a lot of things. Now, that is the necessary pain for the climate gain, which is probably in the long run, 50, 100 years from now, should pay off. But in the short term, the politics and political expediency will take precedent over long-term thinking more often than not. So no Canadian politician wants to shut down the Alberta oil fields, right? Because they are profitable, because they are consequential to the Canadian, political culture, the Canadian political scene, to Alberta politics and beyond. It's an existential fight for Alberta to maintain the production out of the oil fields. Mm-hmm. So, you're messing with people's livelihoods. Mm-hmm. Even if 50 or 100 years from now, we would be better off if they were shut down now.
Yes. But then, it's that whole transition from oil to the green industry, because I know California, they're trying to ban combustible engines by, I think it's pretty recent, the next 10 years or something like that. Mm-hmm. And I just don't know how practical that is or how affordable it is. Can everybody afford a electric car that's worth $60,000 to $100,000?
Well, yeah. When you leave this to the marketplace, the assumption is that, Elon Musk is going to find a way to build a Tesla for under $60,000 or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And that hasn't been, come to the fore, at least not yet. But, everybody's doing the switch over from, gas cars to electric cars requires more than just putting more electric cars on the road. You need an infrastructure. You need the ability to refuel. You need to be able to...
battery production.
Fueling stations or whatever, charging stations.
Yeah, if everybody has their electric car plugged into their house, what does that do to the grid and things like that?
What's it do to the grid? Can you charge a car in the same amount of time it takes to fill up your gas tank at the pump? No, of course not. It takes 90 seconds to fill up your gas tank at the pump. It takes 20 and sometimes 60 minutes to recharge an electric car.
And you can definitely transition, but it's like how aggressive?
How aggressively, exactly.
Yeah.
And the technology is not there yet to have passenger jets, passenger planes running on batteries. Right? We're not quite there yet, and the aviation industry is a major polluter in this world.
Yes,
it's going to take a lot to make that transition.
Yes,
you can write into legislation or pass regulation that says we're going to make the switch by this date, but it's a lot more. It's a lot harder said than done, or a lot easier said than done.
And it's hard because especially in America, like politicians can change every 4 years, parties can change every 4 years. Mm-hmm. And each party has their own agenda, and that can really slow things down, I think.
Sure can. And in the United States, there's less and less overlap between what the two parties will agree to.
A lot of divide.
A lot of divide. So you run the risk of, one party running the show by executive order, or one president running the show by executive order, and the next president rescinding all of those executive orders. If Congress were able to get on the same page and bargain and do enough to make for durable, sustainable regulation and legislation, then you would have the kind of stability you need to do difficult things in the long term.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. Right? It's been happening in the past in the United States, but it's harder and harder to get to because the incentives are to play to the news media, play to the 24-hour news cycle, play to the next 10 minutes Twitter cycle.
The money.
There's that too. It's not all about money, right?
Yeah.
It's about attention. It's about the attention economy. It's about all this kind of stuff. And elected leaders aren't necessarily interested in making money. They're interested in perpetuating their own careers, which makes a lot of sense. That's what democracy is all about for elected leaders. But the incentives in the United States certainly are really perverse, right? And the incentives are, well, to stay in office, because that is the platform by which you have influence. And at the end of the day, when you finally get out the door, to pass through that nice revolving door into the soft world of the Washington establishment, think tanks, boards of advisory and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, careers and reputations are made on the grand performance of being, being intransigent.
Yeah.
And it's very annoying. And it's very frustrating for reasonable people to watch this and see, insert name here, say things that are utterly nonsensical, but it's going to work to their advantage given their own interests.
Yeah. It feels to me halfway through their term too, they're already sort of focused on just winning the next term and not trying to do good.
Yep. That is true. That's partly built into the system. American system, right?
Yeah.
So we know that senators serve 6-year terms. That's a long time.
Yeah.
But in the House of Representatives, it's every 2 years they have to go up for re-election.
Yeah.
2 years. That's bonkers.
Yeah.
Right? So you get elected, and within 8 or 12 months, you have to turn your attention all the way back to getting re-elected. So there's no real incentive to do things that are long-term because your time horizons are short-term.
Yeah.
And that incentivizes the kind of silly behavior that we see out of a lot of people in the House of Representatives.
Yeah. I think I have liquor older than that in my cabinet upstairs.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah. Or wine for that matter.
And the liquor and wine is probably much more mature.
Yeah. Yeah.
And probably leaves a better taste on the tongue.
That's funny. Well said. Well said. How is not to switch gears, but how has it been studying geopolitics and political science from no social media to social media now? Because that must just flip on its head.
It does and it doesn't. The world of geopolitics didn't all of a sudden radically change because Twitter is a thing.
Yeah.
Right? There are some patterns of world politics that are observable, going back 2,000 years, 2,500 years. Right? People are still prone to selfishness, prone to seeing the world through rose-colored glasses or being distrustful.
Yeah.
Or
I need to belong, I guess.
The feeling, yes, exactly.
Tribalism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Perfectly said. It just manifests itself differently in the world of social media. So, if you take a step back and you look at this very, very long view of political history around the world, you could say that all of the things that were observable in ancient Greece are largely observable today.
Yeah.
Right. So the world, that Plato was talking about, he might see similarities these days. I think what the Platos of the world would be shocked at is the speed, and I think that's the key difference between pre-social media era and today, which is the speed with which things develop. Right, and if things happen very, very quickly, there's no time for reflection. There is an impulse to act, to do something rather than do nothing. And so our time horizons, there's that word again, our time horizons of action become much, much shorter. And when you do that, there's less time to reflect, to consider, to consult, to think through options. And when that happens, just like anybody else, when you have to act quickly, there's a very good chance that you're going to make a mistake.
Yeah.
Right. And so here we are in this world of the 24-hour news cycle and the 15-minute Twitter cycle that incentivizes certain ways of seeing the world, which are not necessarily healthy.
Yeah, and it's especially TikTok and I mean even broadcast news. You don't like. What was that? Oh, it's your GoPro. That's all right. We might have to swap a battery after. You just don't have to be on camera. Yeah, I was saying broadcast news, it's like yourself, if you were to go on and talk about political science and things like that, you don't really have much time. No. It's little snippets, little bites, and you don't get like a full picture, which is why I really like podcasts.
Agreed.
Yeah, long format.
I agree. I have done, the appearances on terrestrial radio when you have you're in there for 6.5 to 8 minutes between commercial breaks.
Yeah.
Or between the next guest, and you can't develop an idea, so you have to be short and punchy, and leave the listener with the one line that's going to work. Right? It's not that different from advertising, podcasts are great because we have as long as we possibly want in order to develop ideas.
Yeah. And I wasn't sure. Podcasts have just taken off, especially during COVID. But it was all this short format, and then TikTok came out. But people really do crave that deeper dive into things.
They do. And I think that's a very healthy attitude.
It's normal. It's pre-technology, pre-social media. It's kind of how life was during Plato's time.
I would like to think so.
Yeah,
I'd like to think that the mid 20th century and before was this period of wonderful reflection and
conversation,
all that kind of nonsense. I'll ask my dad about that or something like that.
Yeah.
But, probably not. I mean, people's attention spans are probably shorter now than they were back then.
Yeah.
But, all the kind of like moral panic about attention spans regarding TikTok and Twitter and all that kind of junk looks a lot similar to the moral panic over television in the 60s and the 50s, right? It's rotting kids' brains.
Yeah,
it's
don't
making
sit
them
too
dumber.
close to the television.
You're gonna,
your eyesight.
yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
these kids are dumber. When I was growing up in the 90s, video games. Was the moral panic, right?
Yeah.
All these violent video games are going to turn everybody into Columbine shooters or something like that, or it's going to rot your brain, or it's nobody reads anything anymore. Every single generation has
a thing.
There's this new technology, and then there's this counter response, and you line them up in history, and you're like, wow, we seem to be repeating the same thing over and over again, which is partly true. And each new technology comes with its own new social dynamics, which we got to muddle through. And we're muddling through the social media dynamics these days. We've been doing it for about 10 or 15 years now, since Twitter especially went mainstream. But a lot of the questions that we're asking are not new. What is new, to repeat, is the speed.
Yeah.
Because that light speed kind of situation can really mess up the timing of how a democracy should operate.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like that compounding technology. It just doubles and doubles and doubles and doubles and doubles.
Yeah. What's that? That's what law is that?
I can't think of the term.
It's not Gresham's law. That's the one about a reference to Hitler online, I think. It's somebody's gonna. Anyway, I know what you mean. Like the power of a processor, it will double with every new generation.
Yes.
Somebody out there knows what the answer is.
And how just like technology is just, it may take. Let's say it takes Twitter to get its peak, in 10 years. So then in another 10 years, it's going to be 8 times past what it was.
Maybe, right?
Maybe.
Because we've also seen the rise and fall of these kinds of technologies.
Yes.
Right? How many people are on MySpace? Right? How many people are working through Napster these days?
Yeah,
and,
it was Tumblr.
Tumblr. For all you kids listening, right? Look it up.
Yeah. MSN chat.
Oh my goodness, man! When I was in first year university, everybody was on MSN, listening to their burned CDs through Windows Media Player.
Yep.
These are all words.
LimeWire.
LimeWire.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Pirate music.
I haven't heard that word in about 20 years. Mm-hmm. So, kids these days who are 17, 18, 19 years old, who don't know anything that happened more than 15 minutes ago, don't necessarily realize that what they're going through is very similar to what people have already gone through before. It's just taken on a different form.
It's like cliche term, history repeats itself. And
yeah, I mean, Mark Twain said it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Ha! That's good. Yeah, it definitely does. How much does history bleed into what you study? When you study geopolitics, how far back do you go and study?
You can go back, depending on the culture you're looking at, thousands of years, and it's still relevant.
So in a way, you study history as well.
Absolutely. You cannot study politics in the contemporary period without understanding how we got here.
Yeah.
I remember before I started my PhD, I worked for a consulting company in Toronto. And the boss said to me, when you're writing a report about what we've been doing, you want to structure it along the lines of where are we now? How did we get here? Where are we going? And I've always kept that in mind when, especially teaching students, especially and early undergraduate students, right? Here we are in this environment. We watch the news, we read the news, we scroll through the news, whatever. That is where we are. How did we get here? Well, that all depends. Right? That all depends on the cultural context, the various factors that are feeding into the present, and the ideas that informed, the immediate, the near past. Now, if we're talking about something like democracy, we can go back to, ancient Greece and talk about how You know, how the philosophers of ancient Greece conceptualized how to live properly in the city, in the polis.
Civilized.
Yeah, if you're talking about Chinese politics, you can talk about, you know, Confucian political ideology going back, you know, 3,000-4,000 years, right? The ideas that inform Xi Jinping and Chinese foreign policy today can, you know, go back to the, I'm going to forget the dynasty, but it's something like 1000 BC, right? Around the time of Homer, right? You know, roughly around the time that Homer was writing the Iliad,
Odyssey,
the Iliad and the Odyssey, right? So we're talking about ideas that, you know, reverberate through history.
Yeah.
And while they may seem obscure, once you scratch the surface and you dig into it and you listen to a full-length, feature-length podcast on it, you can see how these old ideas are influential still today. So to answer the question, how far back do you look? Well, you know, it really depends. You can go back forever.
Yeah, as far as there was governance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For the purposes of putting on a lecture or a show, you got to start somewhere. You got to pick your spots. Typically when I teach first-year students, I teach the class as a big history of right now. And I start the clock generally at the end of World War II.
Okay.
Right? That is when the current iteration of the world order that we're living in sort of was birthed. It has its antecedents and, you know, all sorts of caveats and that kind of stuff. But the main story of the emergence of the United States as this globe-bestriding superpower that tries to run the show, for better or for worse, that starts in 1945 with the creation of the United Nations system, with the creation of NATO, with the creation of all the kinds of
Atomic bomb.
the atomic bomb, right? American military, you know, prowess and hegemony, and eventually hegemony once the Soviet Union collapsed, right? All of human rights as a thing, right? Because we didn't have human rights enshrined into law before 1945 in any meaningful way, right? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights comes out of the post-World War II settlement. The world we live in today was largely a creation of what went down in the late 1940s. So I start the clock there, knowing full well that it goes back even further, but you know, we can take a look at the last 80 years and say,
as we see it today,
you know, when Donald Trump threatens to withdraw from NATO, why is this important? Right? And the answer is, well, NATO came out of the end of World War II as a way of, you know, partly to keep Germany and France from killing each other again, right? But it was part of this sort of sense of European solidarity post-Hitler and in the face of the Soviet Union that had developed into a broader sense of European identity and commonality and stability in the transatlantic region, right? So this matters because before NATO, you know, it was every country for himself, right? Now we have this way of cooperating and collaborating in ways that prevents war. And at least in my controversial opinion, war equals bad.
Or bad.
Cooperation equals a lot better. Just in the same way that the turtle equals good, plastic straw equals bad.
Yes. What there were some treaties during World War II between England and France, was there not? There
were agreements. There were always treaties.
Right.
If you go back, if you read the history of Europe going back to, let's say 1500.
Okay.
Right, there are treaties all over the place. Everybody's writing treaties, but everybody's also withdrawing from treaties. Treaties did not have long shelf
How much
lives.
weight do they hold?
How much weight did they hold? The marvelous thing about NATO is that every country is a member of this treaty voluntarily, and every country's legislature passed it. So it is domestic law that the United States is a member of NATO. It is domestic law that Canada is a member of NATO, and so on. That's what makes it democratic, and that's what makes it really, really stable. Now, it's possible to withdraw from NATO if you want, but it would have to be done in accordance with that country's constitution, right? So if Donald Trump wants to withdraw from NATO, this is untested, by the way. He can't just say, snap his fingers and say, I'm withdrawing from NATO.
Yeah.
It might have to go through Congress because Congress passed the Washington Treaty and accepted it into law. This is an untested constitutional problem in the United States. To what degree can the President of the United States abrogate treaties that have been endorsed by Congress? We don't know yet because it hasn't really been tried. So NATO, an act of Congress in the United States, seemingly you would think would have to be abrogated by Congress itself. Here comes Donald Trump saying, I'm going to pull out.
Okay, so he has threatened.
Oh, of course yes, he has.
And it was about money, mostly.
It was, no, I think on this score for Donald Trump, it was almost entirely about money.
Because they were paying too much and other countries weren't paying into it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right?
I remember him saying this.
Yeah, so the United States, as you would expect, pays the lion's share of the collective, pool of NATO spending. And most other countries do not.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we've probably heard the 2% number in the news over the last couple of years. And this is because in 2014, NATO adopted 2% of your GDP spending on military as the sort of benchmark of what your defense spending should be. Canada right now spends about 1.4% of its GDP on the military, falling short. The United States spends something like 3.6, 3.7, so well above, as you might expect, because the United States has military operations all around the world. So it's going to spend more, and therefore it's going to cross the threshold. Since the invasion of Ukraine, more NATO countries have crossed the 2% number, but for the most part, the 60 to 75% of NATO falls below that threshold.
Okay.
Donald Trump hates that for the same reason that he hates the differential rules for climate change responsibilities. Right? If we're paying 2%, you should also pay 2%.
Yeah.
If we're paying 3%, you should pay 3%.
Even if you're a third world.
Even if you're a country in Europe that is not large, like Luxembourg, right?
Yeah.
Or these smaller states that don't have really any significant tax base to be consequential. He hates the idea that other countries are not paying their share and getting wealthier at the same time. He can't stand Germany, right? And when Angela Merkel was the chancellor of Germany, they couldn't stand each other because Germany is an industrial powerhouse and generates a lot of wealth while also falling short of its 2% threshold, right? So during the Trump years, that was the case. That was the cudgel that he would bring out at every turn.
Yeah.
Right? Saying it's not fair that the Germans are getting rich while free riding on American defense spending.
Yeah.
And to a degree, he's right. Right? Canada's equally guilty of this. Like Canada has historically spent as little as possible on its military in order to, do its thing, right? Because we don't have to, because we're protected by 3 oceans. Like nobody's going to invade us by land except the United States.
We're also Commonwealth, which must play into things.
A little bit, but what's more significant is that we live under the security umbrella provided by the United States, and we don't have to spend. We don't have to spend, our quote unquote fair share. So we don't. And we'll reallocate our dollars elsewhere. And that has annoyed American presidents since Dwight Eisenhower. Donald Trump is not new to complaining about free riding NATO allies. He's in a very long and prestigious line of presidents to have complained about this. Trump was the only one who threatened to withdraw from NATO because everybody else isn't chipping in.
Okay. Was he the first? Now, I know he's a little bit disruptive, and him pulling out of the Paris Accord agreement, has a lot of previous presidents gone back on their word like this? Is this a common thing, or is this new in politics? Because he's abrasive.
Yes, he is.
Yes.
He's not the first United States president to back out of a deal, right? To withdraw from a commitment.
Yeah.
So the examples that come to mind right away are Richard Nixon eventually getting out of Vietnam.
That's what I was going to bring up.
Which was probably the right decision.
Yes.
Right?
Now we know.
We know now.
Yes.
In 2021, Joe Biden said, okay, we're going to follow the agreement that Trump made with the Taliban and get out of Afghanistan after 20 years. And we all saw what happened, right? In August of 2021, there was that chaos at the airport in Kabul because the United States was leaving and everybody was trying to hold on to the plane as it left. And we got those side-by-side still shots of the last helicopter out of Saigon in 1975 with the helicopter leaving the roof of the U.S. Embassy in 2021. Almost this perfect kind of parallel.
History rhymes.
History rhyming once again, boys and girls. Now, these were both wars where American presidents were firmly committed to finishing the job.
Yeah.
up until the moment they weren't. That's not necessarily a bad thing. You don't want to keep throwing bad money or keep throwing good money after bad. And the sunk costs fallacy exerts a tremendous pull on American presidents. So we don't necessarily want to, want our presidents and prime ministers to embrace just like a stubborn consistency for its own sake.
Yeah.
They still have to make smart decisions. That leaves us in that gray area of how much consistency and how much abrogation is necessary to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Well, welcome to the wonderful, muddy world of politics.
Is Nixon like the closest, similarity to Trump so far as far as disruptive politicians go? Because he's the only one I can think of that might be somewhat similar, at least. I don't think the world has ever seen anything like Trump before, especially coming from, like you said, the whole real estate in New York and even television with, why am I blanking on his show?
The Apprentice.
The Apprentice.
I believe it was.
So he's a bit of a star as well, which Nixon was, he was an actor, right? So
No, the Ronald Reagan was the actor.
Ronald Reagan
was the
okay.
actor.
I'm mixing them up.
Nixon was, grumbly, angry, intellectual, resentful of everybody around him.
Yes.
So Nixon and Nixon was wicked smart, maybe one of the smartest presidents, of the last century.
Okay.
And so, combine his deep-seated resentment with high intelligence, and you have somebody who's willing to
He can act
break
on it.
the rules,
Yeah.
be sneaky, do all those kinds of underhanded things that now are associated with Richard Nixon.
Was Nixon Watergate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, cheating in elections, right? Election interference, not the first time it's happened.
Yes.
The kinds of diplomacy that he and Henry Kissinger did in Southeast Asia, across the Middle East in the late 1960s, early 1970s, were all based on this kind of cutthroat notion of world politics, right? Abandon the notion of morality and ethics and what we should and ought to do. And we got to go for what are our stone cold interests? How do we accomplish them? Even if it means doing distasteful things, like aligning ourselves with dictators or abandoning Vietnam and that kind of stuff. Sometimes it meant sometimes the difficult thing required somebody with an icy heart in order to accomplish. Sometimes that's necessary, but in the American political context, political values are very important. Right? Political values are crucial to how Americans understand themselves as a democracy, as freedom lovers, and all that kind of stuff. So it doesn't sit well with the American public to side with dictators or side with the bad guys.
Except for the Saudi prince. I
Well,
guess.
the Saudi prince. I mean,
Not to verge into sports, but I do want to get there.
Oh,
though.
we're going to get there. But before we get there, one of my favorite all-time quotations in American political history is what Franklin Delano Roosevelt said about the Nicaraguan dictator Antonio Somoza. I think I'm getting that name right, but I'm going to get the line right. He may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch.
Yeah.
Americans don't love hearing that. They don't like that they're siding with villains or bad guys or authoritarians. But nobody's really going to make a huge stink about it when it's working.
Because America has propped up, I've been watching a lot of documentaries recently, but they have propped up a lot of dictators just because the previous one didn't align with what they were trying to accomplish.
Mm-hmm.
Like Cuba, a lot of South America, Panama. Panama was bad.
Yes, it was.
There was troops that
Noriega.
actually went in there, right? American troops were bombing?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I watched that. I had no idea about that.
All sorts of CIA operations, and
Yes.
special forces operations.
Yeah.
Very rarely is there a large-scale invasion. Right? A lot of this stuff takes place secretly.
Secretly or puppeteering.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's actually quite uncommon to see the kinds of wars we saw in Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan, where
Yeah,
it's
boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground, where
Yeah.
it's in full public view.
Yeah.
Which I suppose is a good thing, because less war is better than lots of war?
Well,
Question mark?
Yeah, because I think there was some, obviously, documentation World War I, but World War II was the first time I think society was seeing footage, like actual footage of Americans dying en masse, I would say.
This is a good question. I mean, the first war photography was in the Crimean War. So we're talking about the 1850s.
Okay,
Right?
that's a long time ago.
Yeah. And now let's fast forward to World War II in the 40s, and we're getting newsreels, we're getting that kind of stuff. And Americans are seeing a much sanitized understanding of the visuals, at least, of World War II.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody can hide from the notion that, every third house on the block has a widow, right? In those kinds of situations, there's no hiding the actual human toll. The Vietnam War was the first time we saw what was roughly equivalent of like live, unfiltered, what's going down in the jungles.
Yeah, and you're hoping that guy doesn't come and knock on your door with an envelope.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the Vietnam War, is one of those turning points in the cultural understanding of what war is all about and the politics of the home front. No surprise that there was a considerable anti-war movement during the Vietnam War, at least partly attributable to the fact that everybody was seeing it.
And that was during the hippie movement, was it not?
Yeah, that was there was the anti-war left, which included the hippies in the mid to late 1960s. What was part of it all, but the anti-war movement wasn't just restricted to the Haight-Ashbury types in the United States and beyond. Right, there were anti-war pockets in academia, in business, in the political scene at the local levels. Much more mainstream groups didn't like this thing because what are we doing this for? Why are 500 American soldiers dying every week in 1968, 1969? Why is there 500,000 American soldiers in Southeast Asia, in a country most people couldn't find on a map?
Yeah.
Right? We understand what Hitler was all about. What is this all about?
Yeah.
And they didn't understand it. And
that was all from a false flag operation, was it not?
well, I mean, that's very tricky. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964 was one of these ambiguous situations where an American ship was patrolling and it thought it was being fired upon, and maybe it was and maybe it wasn't. We know now after the fact that it wasn't being fired upon, but that was used as a pretext. This uncertainty was used as a pretext to pass in Congress the Tonkin Gulf resolution, which enabled the American president to take, quote, all necessary measures, which is legalese for war, legal speak for war, and, off we go.
Yeah. And that divide between democracy and communism, I guess.
That's the larger framing of it all.
Yes.
I mean, that was the American framing of it. This is us, the freedom lovers, against those bad, evil communists, when in fact on the ground, the Vietnamese were fighting just yet another colonizer, right? The Americans followed the line from the French,
yeah.
the Japanese, the French before that. China has always exerted significant influence over Southeast Asia. And in the 1950s and 60s, the Vietnamese were just saying, hey, guys, leave us alone.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
It was a nationalist movement in the way we understand nationalist movements now. It's about self-determination.
Yeah.
But that wasn't how the Americans presented it. And when you understand everything within the rubric of the Cold War, any loss here or there is a loss to the Soviet Union. Right?
Yeah, it's that notion of we need to stop the Reds.
Got to stop the Reds. That's the domino theory. You lose one, that's going to knock over the next one, and the next one, and the next one.
Yeah.
That was the prevailing framework.
Yeah. And it was spreading.
Total nonsense.
Yeah.
Right? Total nonsense at the end of the day. But, in retrospect, it's easy to say that.
Yeah. And their fear was that communism was spreading and their democracy superpower, and they need to spread it.
And they spread
they tried.
freedom and democracy and all that kind of stuff. We're seeing echoes of that today. Right?
Yeah.
What happens if Ukraine falls? Well, to Russia, we don't know. One of the arguments is that, well, Putin's not going to stop there. He'll start nibbling at Eastern Europe.
That's the fear mongering.
Well, it's the same basic argument as the domino theory, that Putin is not going to stop at Ukraine, and he'll start looking further to his west, into the Baltic states, into Poland, into whatever, and it's the logic of that argument is the same as the domino theory. We don't know what's going to happen, of course, with Russia, Ukraine, and the broader geopolitics of it all, but we can see history rhyming once again.
Sorry, can we dive into Ukraine a little bit? Do you mind?
Let's talk about it.
How much thought do you give it? Is this something you talk about at work?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
I feel like you can't, because it's just there in your face all the time.
Well, I mean, that's what makes it so fascinating, because
Yeah.
this is a big deal that's happening right now, and nobody knows how it's going to end, and information about it is coming fast and furious, and making sense of it all is very difficult.
Yes.
This is what we do. This is what I do as a political scientist. We're trying to figure out lots and lots of information coming in all at once.
And each side inflates numbers or deflates numbers. So
Yep.
you don't actually know
Yep.
the damage of what's actually going on.
You don't.
And the biggest thing that I've noticed, just as a photographer, as a filmmaker, is this mass production of drones now.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just go on YouTube and just see battles from the air.
Yeah.
Which has never been done, I don't think, before.
It's certainly not like this.
Not just uploaded by Ukrainian soldiers to the internet.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's quite a shock.
I mean, drones have been used since the 1990s in a
Yes.
significant way. But this is when, cheap, off-the-shelf
Consumer. Yeah.
things. Go to Shoppers Drug Mart, buy a drone,
Yeah.
and, get a live view of the war.
They're flying the same drones I have, but they're just strapping C4 to it.
Yeah.
It's wild to see.
It's a fascinating kind of innovation.
And now Ukraine have a drone sec of the military, do they not now? I think.
A drone what?
They have a whole section of their military
section.
Sorry, I short formed it there. Section of the military that they're just dumping money into drones.
Yeah, and you know why? Because it's cheap. It's cheaper than artillery. It's cheaper than an air force.
And you don't have to send someone out into bullets.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Isn't this amazing? We have these high-tech militaries where you spend billions and billions, if not trillions of dollars on the highest of technology machines, and the thing you can buy off the shelf at Walmart
Is the most efficient one.
is cutting through the noise.
Yeah.
This is a common feature, right? Of the weak versus the strong, right? The strong will always have the bigger machinery, but the weak have the ability to exploit the weaknesses in that by finding innovations.
Yeah, it's almost like guerrilla warfare, I would say, in a way, flying these FPV drones into these tanks. And
Yeah.
they're taking out, $1 million tanks with a $100 drone.
Yeah. So it makes you wonder why, we spend so much money on things like F-35s
Yeah, or
that cost
sending
billions and trillions
Abrams
of dollars.
Yeah. And that was the thing, right? They still haven't sent fighter jets.
No, not fighter. There's the West has sent fighter jet trainers.
And they went to Finland, I believe, to train, or Sweden or something
I think
like
they
that.
went to a bunch of places.
Okay, all right.
I don't get those reports anymore.
Okay,
They don't let
okay.
me in on the phone calls anymore.
Got it.
But the United States and the West has been walking this very fine line of giving Ukraine exactly what it needs to defend itself, but not win,
Yes.
right? Or not have the war spill over into Russia.
That's their fear. They want to do just up until that line,
Yes.
and they're not sure. That line moves all the time.
And that line moves all the time.
Yeah.
At first, the United States said, "Okay, we're going to arm the Ukrainians because they're heroic fighters and all that kind of stuff, but we're not going to give them tanks." And then they did start to give them tanks. We're not going to give them these kinds of technologies. Eventually, they do give them those kinds of technologies. Long-range missiles, and so on. So we've seen this sort of mission creep emerge over the last 2.5 years, which, things change, right? Things evolve, and you have to adapt to the different circumstances on the ground. What the West has been doing has been just enough, as I said, to give Ukraine the means to not lose. But it's certainly not winning, and the prospects of the kind of victory everybody wished to see on the Ukrainian side back in 2022 is not coming to fruition.
Yeah, they were pushing for Crimea.
Yeah, which is why over the weekend that we saw these summits in Switzerland
And Cuba as well.
in Cuba in mid-June in order to come to some sort of negotiated settlement.
Yeah.
Which is not something that you would have heard coming out of the mouths of world leaders 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And those who did say we should come to a negotiated settlement were, branded as appeasers of the Putin regime. And, it's Neville Chamberlain in 1938 all over again, saying, I got peace in our time. Herr Hitler said he's cool with the current arrangement. He's not going to do anything bad.
And then he takes Poland.
And then history happens, and lo and behold, things change. And the circumstances of 2024 are different from 2022. And leaders have to adapt.
It's that speed you were talking about.
It's the speed of things. Yeah, exactly. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah. If Trump gets elected, and he's been threatening recently over the last few days to stop funding the Ukraine war, I feel like that's probably going to be very bad, at least for Ukraine.
Yes. It would be catastrophic for Ukraine if the United States stopped sending weapons.
And the thing I think about is if they do, and then Russia does get the upper hand, and then they do take Ukraine, now they're bordering NATO nations.
Yeah.
Which is probably something nobody wants.
No, I mean, Ukraine is already,
It's that buffer.
Russia already borders NATO countries.
Yeah.
Right? The Baltic states, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia.
Finland now.
Yeah. The Baltic states joined in 2008. Finland joined just this past 6 or 8 months, something like that.
Pretty recent.
The argument that Putin makes, which is only to some degree true, was that the eastward spread of NATO was a threat to Russia's interests. We can take that for what it's worth and say that, okay, we kind of understand you don't want your adversary creeping too far into your own backyard.
Yeah.
And so to some degree, that NATO expansion argument, it makes sense. Whether or not Russia actually regarded this as a security threat is another story. It's a very potent argument to say that, well, this whole Ukraine situation, NATO, it's your fault, right? You shouldn't have put us into this insecure position. You should not have, in 2008, said that Ukraine will eventually become a member of NATO because Ukraine is so significant to Russia's sense of its own historical self and its own sense of greatness. That was the line. Now, that was the bridge too far. That was the red line for Russia.
Now they have precedents to move in, potentially.
At the very least, they have a pretext to move in.
Yes.
Now, whether or not you buy those arguments is a different story. Like, Putin also has this ideology about Russia's greatness and the history that goes back, 800 or 900 years to when Saint Vladimir embraced Orthodox Christianity in Ukraine and so on and so forth. That's all part of his own weird historical mythology, which is to some degree grounded in history.
I listened to his conversation with the Fox News, blanking on his name. Tucker Carlson.
We don't have to mention his name.
Yeah, that guy. I did listen to Putin talk. He just went into depth about all of Ukraine and his ideology and history, and it was fascinating to see it from his perspective.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Did it have anything to do with NATO?
No.
Exactly. So here's the political science question that I would pose to my fourth-year students. Is Vladimir Putin waging war in Ukraine because NATO expanded in the 90s and 2000s, or because Ukraine has this significance to Russia's identity? I don't know the answer to that. Mm-hmm. It could be a little bit of both, but certainly if you look at what Putin himself has said over the past 15 or 20 years, he may not like NATO expansion, but the idea of Ukraine going west is more significant than the idea of NATO coming east.
Yeah. And how much is he willing to pay for it?
So far, Putin has been
a lot
willing to go to the wall for this one.
Yes.
I go to the mattresses for this one. And the West has been very typically, 1 foot in and 1 foot out.
Yeah.
You know why that is, though? Like, do you think the West is kind of just giving them guns and weapons and funding just enough so, like, it keeps Russia occupied?
When the war broke out, the United States' first instinct was to keep this from becoming a general war, right? Keep this localized, right? Keep it in a box. So that translated to giving Ukrainians just enough to fight off the Russians, right? Which they have done and fought basically to something resembling a stalemate. Successfully so, right? The United States, this war has not spilled over into other domains. It is nicely bottled up, at least for now. Nuclear weapons haven't been used. Tactical nuclear weapons haven't been used. Yes, we've seen horrible war crimes, but at very least it's contained. So mission accomplished? Question mark. Nobody's gonna pat themselves on the back for saying that, yeah, we've funded them to the degree that they can, claim a stalemate. That's not exactly a ringing endorsement of a strategy, but it's effective enough to preoccupy Russia, say that we're standing up for, freedom and democracy and all that kind of stuff in Ukraine, and maintaining this sort of stability of a world order whereby invading other countries is bad.
Yeah, because if they didn't do anything, what does that say? If they just let them?
Great question.
A democratic nation too.
Yeah.
Has been corrupt in the past.
Oh yeah, of course.
Yeah, but still democratic.
On the upswing. I mean, even if we take a rosy view of Ukraine and its political development, yes, it's sort of like this semi-democracy. It's had problems with corruption and some autocracy, but since 2014, there has been a greater regard for the popular voice. Mm-hmm. And so, it was regarded as an emerging democracy coming out of the, its Cold War authoritarianism. And it was regarded as part of Europe, or at least soon to be a part of Europe, quote unquote Europe. So, they're on our side and we have to stand up for them when they can't stand up for themselves.
Yeah.
That kind of ideology of sticking with your democratic compatriots is a very powerful one. And it's one that's very attractive to Canadians. It's very attractive to the United States. It's very attractive in an electoral sense, because you can say that, hey, Ukrainian voters, we're standing up for your diasporic homeland. And it works, right? But there are real limits, because once it stops being fun, once it stops being a successful or a winning strategy, you run up against the problem of, well, how long are we going to continue throwing good money after what is maybe a losing proposition?
Yeah.
The lesson from Afghanistan is, 20 years, right? It took 20 years for the West to get out of Afghanistan because we refused to see the writing on the wall, certainly after 2014.
And the Russians tried it before them and weren't successful.
And the British before that,
Yeah.
and the British again before that, and Alexander the Great before that, and the Persians before that.
Nobody's ever. Yeah.
Afghanistan is a tough nut to crack.
Yes.
Right? It is a place that is built for insurgency.
Yes.
Right? So, let's learn the lesson of the past, 2,000 years and say, let's stay out of Afghanistan and try not to control what goes on there, because they got a long history of winning.
Yeah. They play the long game.
They do. They do. There's an expression that the Taliban had that, the Americans may have the watches, but we have the time.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, not bad.
Wow. Yeah. And now the Taliban run it again. So be it.
They are.
I haven't really been keeping tabs on the whole situation since that whole airport thing.
You and most other people. It's
so much is happening. It's
so much has happened. Exactly.
What do you focus on? You, a lot of things.
Well, the first thing that I do when I wake up in the morning is I go to ESPN.com and I check the scores from the night before and all that kind of stuff.
I was gonna ask where you source your information from.
I'll start by saying I do not do social media at all. Never have, probably never will.
Okay.
And I think as a result, I have the best mental health of anyone I know.
You probably do.
I probably do. So I'm going to pat myself on the back for that.
All right. So I can't tag you on Instagram then?
No, basically not.
Yeah.
I'm a mystery man. Although you could just Google my name and, I'm the first one that comes up.
Yeah.
I am, I have faith in the mainstream news organizations.
Okay. Because
of their editorial practices. And it's not so much that it's the New York Times or whatever, or CBC, that that doesn't give them any credibility because of the branding. It's because they're committed to an editorial practice that I agree with, right? Where information needs to be vetted by multiple levels of editors, there's accountability, and when they make a mistake, there's a correction. It's slow and it's old school, and it's certainly not consistent with the speed with which social media information zips around the world, but it is stable.
Yeah,
right?
it's methodical, but it's peer reviewed.
Yeah.
Whereas an independent journalist, they just put it out.
It's different. I mean, that's not to say that independent journalists are hacks or making stuff up.
Yeah.
It's that there needs to be some sort of editorial process to ensure that what is being presented to the public is correct. Fact checkers are expensive. We all know that, right? Which is one of the reasons why the mainstream legacy media is, costs money and is failing, because it's so much easier to get free information from places with lower editorial standards. Mm-hmm. That's just the nature. That's just the dynamic that exists out there. But to your question, I wake up in the morning, I got my apple and my banana, my peanut butter, my toast, and my green tea, just because this is the important part of the story. And I check the scores from the night before, right? I'll check how my fantasy team did. And then once I see that they didn't do too well, put that stuff to the side. And okay, let's go, Globe and Mail, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, and the CBC, and then various other things. I have at the top of my browser just, about 20 or 30 news outlets.
Okay.
Both mainstream and perhaps not the most mainstream, that I go to and I visit and, see the world as much as possible from many perspectives, but not too many perspectives, right? You can't have such an open mind that your brain slides out, right?
Yeah.
You gotta start somewhere and end it somewhere. But I, respecting their editorial practices, you take as much in as possible, and you take note and see how things develop. I have sacrificed being the first to know in order to take that approach. I will never be the first person to know a thing. Somebody's always going to come to my office door saying, "Have you seen this?" And I say, "No." "Well, it's all over Twitter." I'm like, "Oh, I'm not on Twitter." And you click away, and from the ball game or the afternoon baseball game that's on when I'm supposed to be working, and you check it out and say, "Oh, okay." And now we're up to speed.
Yeah.
Right. In my view, there's no real virtue in being the first. Right. I would rather be right than fast.
Yeah, and sometimes fast is wrong.
Sometimes fast is wrong. Sometimes slow is wrong. And that's what makes this difficult.
Yeah.
Right? So, as a scholar, I work as slow can possibly be. But the slowness enables me to get almost as much as right as is humanly possible.
Yeah.
I'm still going to be wrong on some occasions, but I'm not going to fall prey to the misperceptions that rear their ugly head when you're trying to operate quickly. Because you're going to make a mistake,
Yeah.
and you're going to be subject to all kinds of prejudices and biases that are there but are invisible, and they still get a hold of you.
Yes. Yeah, I Reddit I use a lot, and I follow a lot of threads based on if I'm following the Ukraine war or whatever, I'll follow that, and oftentimes they do link articles to the mainstream media and things like that. So I guess I do read a bit of that as well.
Like the Times and all these other journalistic outlets that have the capital, that have the wherewithal to send reporters out into the field, are reporting on behalf of Reddit and all these other places that pick up on those stories.
Yeah.
Right? Somebody has to actually go out there and ask the questions and dig deep. It costs money. It takes time, and those the intrepid reporters out there are doing yeoman's work for the rest of us, and
in combat. A lot of the times
in combat,
which is like kudos to them. I'm not built for that.
Yeah. Now, I mean, there's also the notion of like the citizen journalist,
yeah,
right? Who can with the phone record stuff. But there's an important distinction to be made between a journalist committed to a professional ethic,
yeah,
and all of the things that come with that, and somebody who's simply just saying what they saw.
Yeah.
That's not to say that one is superior to the other, or one is always going to be right and the other is always going to be wrong. But there is a degree of expertise that comes with being a pro.
Yeah.
As an academic, as a professor, my authority at the front of the classroom turns on that. Like, who am I to talk about world politics to all of you students out there? Well, I'm a guy who's committed to a rigorous form of information collection and analysis. And I'm not saying trust me because, I have a certain degree. I'm saying trust me because I'm committed to this thing that is good for you. And if you come along for the ride, let me earn your trust.
Yeah. I like that. Have you seen, did you see Civil War by chance, the movie? The new one that came out?
Not the Avengers movie, right?
Okay. No, not the
Avengers. No, I have not seen. I know what you're talking about, but I have not seen it.
A lot of people hated it because they were expecting this epic military battle between these theoretical factions, but it actually follows these photographers and these press that follow these militias going around. And just as a photographer, I loved it. I thought it was great, and I think it gave me a sense of like what it would actually be like to have that press bulletproof vest on and go into combat and follow these people around and photograph them and journal it.
Wow. What did you make of it?
I loved it. I thought it was great. And and they tell it through the lens as well. You can see them photographing, and then they show the developed film as it's playing out.
Oh, really?
And then it follows a younger journalist who's wants to get into it and who's following two expert ones who've been like some seasoned journalists. And then it just kind of goes about this theoretical civil war in America. But a lot of people hated it because they wanted action, and there's some action.
They don't want thoughtful reflections on the role of the media and the difficulty of being the independent eye when you have a stake in things as well.
The whole movie's seen through this young girl's eye who wants to be this journalist.
Huh.
Yeah, which I really liked.
I'm gonna have to put it on my list.
Yes, I highly recommend it. I don't know what the actual reviews are, but I feel like most people were like, "Where's the action?" Yeah, we want massive battles and.
Who cares about the reviews?
Yeah,
decide for yourself.
I thought it was just fantastic of a movie.
Okay.
Yeah, same director as like Ex Machina, and do you want to actually pull it up for me, Trevor? Just
Ex Machina was really good. I really like that movie.
I haven't seen Ex Machina.
Very good.
Okay.
Really good. Okay.
I
so
know the premise.
Good pedigree.
Yeah. He's hit or miss, this director. I feel like he's like M. Night Shyamalan, just kind of like super good movie, and then like
peaks and valleys.
Peaks and valleys.
All right, so next time the Blue Jays games gets out of hand, I'll flip it over to that movie.
So you're a bit of a sports guy too, then?
Big sports guy.
Okay. I enjoy playing sports. I play a lot of sports, but I don't follow. It's a time commitment for me.
It is a time commitment. It's an emotional commitment.
Yes, and especially if you're
follow
into
you your whole life. It will ruin days.
And there's sports betting now, which I feel like, at least I have some friends who used to enjoy sports, and now they get stressed over sports because they have money on it.
Oh, I don't need to put money on it to get stressed over things. I'm bad.
Oh, so you're really into it.
I remember making and losing a bet on an NFL game when I was in grade 2.
Oh, wow.
So this is, I don't know, 1990, something like that. I remember losing. I remember handing over the $2 bill to my friend and hating the feeling of losing. And I have almost never gambled on sports since then.
Done.
Now, I just got off saying that I have a fantasy team, and yes, there's, a $20 buy-in, but we'll set that little contradiction aside here for now. Yeah. But I could not get into, I can't get into the day-to-day sports betting stuff. The lines. I understand how the logic works, and I understand the numbers, and I hear it on the sports talk radio. But that's a dark road for me to go down.
Yes.
I don't want to do that.
I'm easily addicted to things. I hyper focus on things, and I just feel like sports betting is just not a good thing to hyper focus on. Unless
you're good at it.
Unless you're good at it. I don't really watch sports in general, so I feel like I wouldn't be good at it. But.
Well, it's not about sports; it's math, right? Sports gambling is about math and stats. You don't have to know anything about the sport.
Yeah.
So bet with the market on everything, and you're probably going to come out ahead most of the time.
Yeah. Hey, Trev, I'm just curious who the director is. You don't have to pull it over if it's been...
kind of disappeared now, honestly.
Being a problem. Okay, well, that's all right. I was just curious who the director is. Okay. Before we wrap up, I would love to dive into sports washing, which is the whole reason you and me met.
That's true.
And I think it's your aunt that has worked with my mom. Is that the connection?
I believe so.
Okay, and I came for your sports washing
And
lecture.
So for everybody listening, my aunt... she's got a book club, friend club, that kind of situation. Hey, my nephew is a professor. Maybe he can do a lecture for us in the basement.
Yeah.
And so I did, and I came in and I delivered a lecture on what's Saudi Arabia been up to with regards to all this sports stuff. We've been hearing about the Live Golf Tour and Newcastle United and all these other shenanigans. What's the deal? And that was the presentation. And that's how we met.
Yeah. And it was good timing for me because I just watched a documentary about MBS and the Khashoggi murders.
Yeah.
And so I was like really into that whole Saudi Arabia prince royal family. I started researching it, and then I got the invite to that, and I was like, oh. I'm already like really into this topic.
Oh, that's
this
fantastic.
Is exciting.
You've done the readings before you came to class.
A little bit.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You need to say something to my students. Do the readings before you come to class. It's much more enjoyable.
Yeah, you can get a little bit more in depth and more context.
Shocking.
Yes. Who knew?
Yeah.
And I know they all have other classes and stressors, and they want to party and have friends, and they're young. And do the readings, guys.
Do the readings.
Do the readings.
You're paying so much money to be in school.
Yeah.
Why would you not make the most of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
God.
So sports washing.
Sports washing.
What is, for those that are listening, what is sports washing?
Sports washing is all about laundering, right? You have a reputation that is not so great, and you launder that reputation by putting on a good show, right?
And would this include things like the Olympics?
This, of course, would do things like the Olympics. If you have a reputation as, a villain in the world or an authoritarian country in the world, you can soften your image by putting on a spectacle for the world to watch. It's been done many, many times before. They'll probably continue to do it, but that's what it's all about.
When I think of the term sports washing, this iconic image comes up in my head, and it was during the Olympics in Brazil, and there was this picture of this, God knows what, $10 billion stadium, and then right next door, just slums.
Yep.
And you can obviously imagine people's frustrations seeing that photo.
Of course.
Yeah.
Costs a lot of money to put on an Olympic Games or a World Cup or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But what does it allow the host country to do? It allows them to put their best face forward on the world stage. Everybody's going to be watching. Now, if you're there on the ground, of course, you're going to see the poverty right next to the opulence. But on TV, because the Olympics and the World Cup, they are TV shows. Yeah. On TV, they look fantastic, and you can announce yourself on the world stage, just as China did in 2008, or Brazil and South Africa did in the early 2010s. And you can say, "Hey, look at us! Like we've arrived. We are good. Look at how could you hate? How could you dislike a country that could put on a show like this?
Look at all the medals that we have. Look at all the gold that our athletes have.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So pay no attention to the poverty or the racism or the authoritarianism in the work camps and all that kind of stuff. Focus instead on the big shiny opening ceremonies.
Yes.
Celebrate the vuvuzelas, if you remember the vuvuzelas. Look it up, kids. That is what sports washing is all about. It's about laundering an otherwise dirty reputation by putting on a good sports show.
Yeah. Yeah. And Saudi Arabia is at least in the news about it recently. All that oil money.
Yeah, it helps to have a lot of money at your disposal.
It really does.
It really does. All of this Saudi Arabian sports washing is really new. It's only come around in the last 7 or 8 years or so, and it all came about because of the emergence of Mohammed bin Salman as the crown prince and the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. I got to go to my notes on this one because the names, dates, and places are going to be a little tricky for me to keep in mind. But okay, here's the basic story. Mohammed bin Salman, MBS as they call him. He's a young guy. Right now he's only 38 years old, which is pretty impressive as an age for a very consequential world leader. He emerged as the crown prince, as the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia in 2017 after a whole series of kind of palace maneuvers. In 2015, I think it was, King Abdullah dies. Old guy dies, right? He'd been in power for a very, very long time. His brother, King Salman, takes over. King Salman is also an old guy, and he's not exactly the sharpest. So he's leaving a lot of the governing to his crown princes, very palace intrigue kind of stuff. And out of this dynamic, MBS emerges as the smart one. Right? He's razor sharp. By all accounts, by foreign journalists, he's very astute, constantly taking notes, constantly, with ideas, constantly speaking up, born leader, all that kind of stuff. So credit where credit is due. Let's assume he's a really, really smart guy. He's also a modernizer. He also recognizes that Saudi Arabia can't rely on its oil economy in perpetuity. So he's looking towards 2050, 2060, and says, we got to get, oil is in decline. We got to get out of this business as much as possible. So he's trying to transform the Saudi economy from an extractive only economy to something more advanced. Of course, oil is still there and it's still very profitable, but he's moving into finance, moving into entertainment, moving into these kinds of sports.
Tourism too.
And sports investments that are part of this broader diversification strategy. And that's how we should regard the sports washing initiatives. It's not about laundering the reputation, or at least not only about it. It's about this broader move to modernize the Saudi Arabian economy for the 21st century. That's what makes this fascinating. So, the most famous cases are of, the Saudi Arabian Sovereign Wealth Fund buying Newcastle United of the English Premier League, of standing up the Live Golf Tour, right, and spending exorbitant sums trying to.
It was Tiger Woods was like $1 billion.
Like $800 million, something like that.
Ridiculous money.
But huge pots of money, huge signing bonuses for former PGA stars. And why? Well, because they have basically like, a bottomless checking account with which to spread around. It's not necessarily bottomless. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund is worth something like $600 billion. Right? That's a lot of money. And the sovereign wealth fund is money that is typically set aside from the revenues from natural resources, and particularly oil, that are set aside in order to do investments in other areas.
Okay.
So Canada has it. Norway has it. Any extractive industry, a country with extractive industry, will have a sovereign wealth fund. It's legal. It's very common. Saudi Arabia is different because they got a lot of oil. They have a lot of oil revenues, and they are prepared to spend, and they have been doing so. Right. So go to the numbers here. The Newcastle United purchased $400 million. The Live Golf Tour, many $1 billion and counting. Esports, $37 billion. Wrestling, $1 billion. Motorsports, $1.4 billion. Right? Money sloshing around to Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi to, tweet nice things about Saudi Arabia or play a game here and there. And it doesn't really matter. Right? These are just insane sums of money that they can spend in order to attract investments, in order to attract attention, in order to, yes, launder the reputation, but also to implicate the rest of the world in Saudi Arabia's transition, right? If we, if international investors have a stake in the success of Saudi Arabia's economic transition, well, that's sort of a hedge against the Saudi Arabia being abandoned by the West, right? It wraps up foreign investors in the interests of Saudi Arabia, and by extension, the interests of the Saudi royal family. So it's a sort of like a 1-2 punch here, right? International investments better prepares Saudi Arabia for the economic transition of the 21st century, and it also better preserves the future of the Saudi regime, which is a very, very convenient thing if you are an authoritarian leader like Mohammed bin Salman.
Yes. He sounds smart.
Yes.
Yes. And
yes,
I'm somewhat familiar. He has this 2030 plan, correct?
He does.
Yeah.
That's his plan. That is the kind of formal strategy for the country itself.
And it's public. You can look.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's meant to be public.
Yeah.
Right. It's in English, glossy kind of images, all that kind of stuff. And they're not hiding anything. They're saying, here's what we're doing.
Yeah.
Oil is, it's not going to last forever, so we need to make a transition. And we're going to target 2030. It's just a nice sort of round number. The transition is going to include tourism. It's going to include building new infrastructure. It's going to include sports. It's going to include entertainment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, for a couple of reasons. One, and they say it, we want international investments. We want everybody to be involved in Saudi Arabia so that Saudi Arabia is the hub of finance between Europe, East Asia, Europe, Asia, and Africa, right? At the same time, all this investment is going to help out the geostrategic stability of Saudi Arabia across the Middle East. It's a tough neighborhood. Saudi Arabia is a counterbalance to Iran and Iranian influence in the Middle East. How are you going to do that? Well, by generating revenue from oil and all that kind of good stuff.
Yeah.
It's also going to help give our people choice in entertainment, not choice in voting, right? Not choice in who leads, but at least you're going to be entertained.
Yes.
So you get the bread in the circus, and you get everybody profits. The elites will make money off of these investments. The elites are going to be happy. The people are going to be happy. What's there to complain about? Why should MBS step down after 4 years?
Yeah.
No, he's going to serve for life, and this is the grand plan for 2030 and beyond.
And America has a good relationship with them, or wants to at least.
The United States has a very tricky relationship with Saudi Arabia.
They're civil.
They are civil. They have a relationship that was originally based on access to oil, of course, right? Excuse me.
No worries.
Oil, they strike oil in Saudi Arabia in the 1930s, I believe it was. And ever since then, the United States has said, we need access to this resource. Became especially potent in late 1970s and early 1980s after the Iranian Revolution, which basically took those oil reserves out of consideration for the U.S. So the U.S. has had to have this dance with Saudi Arabia, two wildly different countries with different sets of political values, because of geostrategic necessity. It has run up against contradictions, right? On top of oil, Saudi Arabia's chief export in the 80s and 90s was Islamic extremism, right? Wahhabi ideology that at the end of the line produced Osama bin Laden in 9/11, and we all know the story from there. The United States has known this, right? Knew this the whole time, but geostrategic necessity meant that, okay, we got to hold our nose and tolerate this kind of stuff, even if it means these contradictions that has drawn the United States into war across the Middle East. That kind of stuff has eased off in the last couple of years. And the emergence of Mohammed bin Salman as a more moderate, we'll call him as moderate as an authoritarian can be, at least a modernizer, he's a guy that the United States can do business with, even if it means putting up with the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi, or some other human rights violations.
Yeah.
He may be a son of a bitch.
He'll play game.
But he's our son of a bitch, right?
Yeah, history
Rhyming
rhymes.
once again.
Rhyming once again. Just that whole it fascinates me because I had no idea that country was run by this elaborate royal family.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
It's the only country in the world named after a family.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The Saud family.
The Saud family, Saudi Arabia.
How about that?
And what's their relationship? So since they do play game with America, what's their relationship with the surrounding area? Is it...
They are hostile to Iran.
Okay.
Saudi Arabia is hostile to
Which
Iran.
is good for America.
Which is beneficial for America.
Yes.
Saudi Arabia is hostile to the Houthi rebels in Yemen.
Okay.
Right? And the Houthi rebels are aligned with Iran. Saudi Arabia is more or less on reasonable terms with other consequential countries in its near abroad. Egypt, Israel, not Syria, because Syria is aligned with Iran. But basically, the consequential countries in its near abroad that are pro-American are also generally pro-Saudi Arabia as well.
Okay.
So what we have are like these two-level games, right? There's the regional game of jockeying for power position in the Middle East, and then there's the broader role that the United States plays in the Middle East and the United States vis-a-vis China, and that layer of world politics. Right? We're playing multidimensional chess when we're talking about the geopolitics of the Middle East.
I always wonder because most Middle Eastern countries have been in conflict or are in conflict with the United States, but Saudi Arabia seems to be that one that
Saudi Arabia
don't
is not.
touch.
Yep, it's a different beast because of those the oil reserves that we have known about since the 1930s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's super interesting to me. Anything recent coming up as far as like the whole sports washing thing in MBS or?
Correct me if I'm wrong, and we might want to look this up, but Saudi Arabia has recently won the rights to put on the Asian Winter Games. Yes, you heard it. The Winter Games, the Asian Winter Games.
Okay.
Which, last time I checked, Saudi Arabia is a desert country.
Yeah.
And doesn't have a lot of snow.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see how this is going to work.
Is it going to be all indoor skiing hills?
Well, it's not going to be outdoor skiing hills. There you go. Look at that. Well, Saudi Arabia wins bid to host the Asian Winter Games in 2029. So mark, put it on your calendars, folks. Saudi Arabia is also applied to, and I think has won the right to co-host. I think it's an Olympics or maybe it's a World Cup. I can't quite remember. Alongside Egypt and Greece.
Okay. I'm not familiar with the landscape, but apparently they do have mountains.
Oh, they got mountains, they got deserts, they just don't have a ton of water.
I see.
Or what was the other one?
World Cup.
I can't remember. It just Saudi Arabia bids with Egypt and Greece.
Well, and if we're talking about a bid,
Yeah.
I assume they would win.
This first stadium, that's not it.
So everybody paying him.
Oh, World Cup.
There you go.
Greece World Cup, yeah. 2030 football. World
Egypt,
Cup.
Greece, Saudi Arabia 2030 FIFA World Cup bid. There it is.
Wow, so they're really leaning in and they're pretty successful, it sounds.
Yes,
it
they
sounds
are.
Like.
One of the reasons they're so successful is that Western countries aren't applying anymore. Western countries recognize that the cost of hosting these mega events are just astronomical, and they're getting higher and higher every single year, and it's not worth it anymore.
And how do you compete with a country that has a fund of 800 billion sitting there just to expand and
You could if you wanted to.
If you wanted
but
to,
that's the
but-
thing; they don't want to anymore.
Yeah.
And if the Americas of the world aren't interested in hosting and paying the cost for this anymore, it's just going to end up falling to these authoritarian countries that have gobs of oil money on hand.
Yeah, it's almost like a de facto.
Yeah.
So much money.
So over the next 5, 10, 15
So
years,
much.
you might see increasingly countries that most people have never heard of.
Yeah.
That just happen to be oil rich or resource rich in that particular way, hosting
These world events.
hosting mega events like the Olympics and the World Cup.
Yeah, because the Olympic, it's extremely expensive. Like just to build a stadium, you're talking tens of billions. And then you have to host everybody.
And then you got to host, and you got to put up with all the rules that they want to get put in place.
Yeah.
The argument for decades has been that, well, it's good because it's going to be an investment in your city, an infrastructure that you would never be able to get otherwise. You'll get
Tourism money.
and the money is going to be expedited, and tourists are going to come in, and it's just a big advertisement for your city. Well, check the record, and you'll see that most cities end up losing money when hosting the Olympics and are eventually saddled with enormous stadiums that nobody uses.
Yeah, because what do you do with it afterwards?
You don't. Right?
It's
60,000 people are not going to go see a track meet,
No.
a high school track meet at the Bird's Nest Stadium in Beijing.
No.
Toronto is going through this right now because it's co-hosting some FIFA events in the next couple of years. And, well, costs have spiraled. And, Toronto is a city that, has a lot of problems that it could spend those hundreds of millions of dollars on in more socially responsible ways
Yeah, then a big old stadium.
than a big old stadium.
Before we wrap it up, is there anything I haven't touched on that you would love to speak about?
Oh, man, we can go on forever.
I know. I feel like you're going to be a repeat guest.
That would be very nice.
Yeah.
I can't really think of anything
Okay.
in particular that
All
I'm
right.
burning to get out of my
The
chest.
top two are obviously because I read your paper on Trump and the sports washing, which we met over. So
Fantastic.
those are the two major ones I wanted to touch on.
I think we've done it.
Okay, great.
How,
So
how we've been here for what? Hour and a half, 2 hours now?
2 hour, yeah, 2 and a bit.
Hour 40.
Hour 40? Okay.
That's
hour
good.
40.
That's the perfect length of movie.
Yes, I think so.
Buck
Stay under
40.
that 2 hour mark.
Yep.
Yeah. Most have been around, I would say, hour 40 to 220 is kind of like the average so far.
Good.
Yeah. You're our
I'm happy.
13th podcast so far?
Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Wilt Chamberlain of 13. There you go.
Oh, look at that.
Look at that. Perfect.
Yeah, didn't even ask you to wear that.
This was premeditated.
Intuition.
Don't worry.
Yeah.
Don't worry. This is on purpose.
Had to match the Converse.
Had to match the Chucks.
Yeah,
Wilt
yeah.
Chamberlain. The Big Dipper.
Yeah.
Human cheat code. Fantastic.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank
to
you for
come
having
here.
me. Thank you for the beverage.
You're very welcome. I will. We always post the. I do like a little intro and some cool little footage of me making it,
Nice.
so people can make it. So,
Fantastic.
yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks, Ira. Before we leave, I know you don't have social media, but like, where can people read your stuff?
That's a great question. Most of my stuff is behind a university paywall.
Yes.
Because that's the. But hey, look me up. Aaron.Ettinger at Carleton.ca is my email address. Aaron Ettinger is my name at Carleton Political Science. Look me up if you like what you see. Send me an email. I leave my emails in front of me 18 hours a day. I will respond.
There you go. And for those listening, some of his articles, there is like a free 2-week membership, I think. 2-week trial. So that's why I was reading some of yours on.
Sure, and I'm also very willing to violate every copyright rule to get my stuff out there.
Yeah. All right.
But you didn't hear that from me.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Beautiful.
All right, thanks. Nice. That was awesome.
Good. I'm glad. That was fun.
Yes. Very in depth.